Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping right into a question that matters if you walk, run, or cycle. Does reflective gear actually save lives?
Yeah, it's something people assume, but we're going to dig into the actual evidence.
We've looked through a ton of research studies, reviews, guidelines to give you the clear takeaways, without getting lost in the weeds.
And it's so important. Pedestrians, cyclists, we call them vulnerable road users or VRUs, they're just at much higher risk in traffic incidents.
Seriously, look at the U.S. data. Pedestrians and cyclists make up something like 16 to 20% of all traffic deaths. That's a big chunk.
And it gets way worse at night. Way worse. The risk can be up to 7 times higher in the dark.
Get this, over 60% of pedestrian deaths. They happen between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. And for cyclists, 56% are at dawn, dusk, or night.
And often it's not even about drunk driving or fatigue, though those are factors too. A lot of the time it's just poor visibility. The driver didn't see them in time.
Which brings us right back to the core question, doesn't it?
Exactly. If not being seen is the problem, does gear designed to make you seen actually solve it? Does reflective gear demonstrably save lives and cut down on injuries?
That's what we're aiming to answer today, based on the evidence. We've looked at systematic reviews, controlled studies, real-world observations.
Official guidelines, the works. And we're covering the different types of gear. Fluorescent for daytime.
From that bright stuff.
Retro-reflective for night. And this really interesting concept called Biomotion.
We'll also touch on how well this stuff works in different situations: day, night, rain, fog, city streets, country roads.
And how it interacts with newer car tech, like those automatic braking systems. It's getting complicated.
Right. So basically, does it make you easier to spot? Does it help drivers realize you're a person? And does that actually make you safer? Let's find out. Oh, and this deep dive is brought to you by the Be Safe, Be Seen podcast, sponsored by Reflectors, the high-visibility cycling and running gear brand.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. How does this gear actually work? What's the science?
Let's talk retro-reflection first. That's the key for nighttime. Unlike, say, your normal clothes that scatter light everywhere.
Retro-reflective materials are designed to shoot light straight back where it came from, back to the headlight.
Exactly. They use these tiny little microprisms or glass beads. So to the driver, you light up like a Christmas tree almost. Much brighter than the surroundings.
Which is crucial, right? Because otherwise in dark clothes, you just blend in until the car's really close.
Totally. Then there's fluorescence for daytime. That's those super bright, almost glowing colors.
Yeah, the neon yellows, oranges, pinks. How do they work?
Well, they absorb invisible UV light from the sun and then re-emit it as visible light. So they actually look brighter than ordinary colors, especially in daylight or, dawn, dusk, cloudy days.
Makes sense. They need some daylight UV to work, though.
That's the key. They don't do anything in complete darkness. No UV, no extra brightness.
Okay. And what about Biomotion? You mentioned that earlier.
Ah, Biomotion. This is pretty cool. It's about how our brains are wired to recognize human movement patterns, the way our legs and arms swing when we walk or pedal.
So the idea is to put reflective stuff on those moving parts.
Precisely. Ankles, knees, wrists, elbows. When those reflective points move, it creates a pattern that drivers instantly recognize as human.
It goes beyond just seeing something to seeing someone.
Exactly. Research suggests that recognizing the human form triggers a much faster, more urgent reaction from drivers. Like, whoa, person, not just, oh, object.
That makes intuitive sense. You react differently to a person potentially stepping out than, say, a trash can on the curb.
Right. But we should also mention, this stuff isn't perfect forever. Fluorescent colors can fade with washing and sun exposure.
Yeah, your old high-vis vest might not be as effective as you think.
And retro-reflective material needs to be reasonably clean and not covered up to work properly. Mud splashes, backpacks covering it, that reduces effectiveness.
Good practical points. So we know how it works. Does it actually make a difference in the real world? What's the evidence?
Okay, this is where it gets compelling. Let's talk detection distances first. A pedestrian in dark clothes at night. A driver might only spot them at about 50 meters.
Which isn't very far, especially if the car's moving quickly.
Not at all. But add a reflector. That distance can jump to around 350 meters. That's like 7 to 10 times further away.
Wow. Okay, 350 meters versus 50. That's a huge amount of extra reaction time. Think about stopping distances even at moderate speeds. 50 meters isn't much margin.
Exactly. And Biomotion adds another layer. Studies show pedestrians using reflective markers on their limbs are noticed at distances up to 10 times greater than just wearing a reflective vest.
10 times just for putting it on the moving parts.
Yeah. And research from Queensland University of Technology found drivers recognize pedestrians with biomotion markers 3 times further away than those just in a vest. Recognition, not just detection.
That distinction seems really important. Seeing versus understanding what you're seeing.
It is. And cyclists see similar benefits. Reflectors on ankles and knees can make them visible up to 6 times further than wearing nothing reflective.
And combining a vest with limb reflectors is better than just the vest.
Seems so. Even for motorcyclists, some data suggests reflective gear can triple their visibility distance compared to standard gear. The takeaway is clear: you are seen much, much earlier.
Those distance increases are impressive, but what about the bottom line? Does it actually lead to fewer accidents and deaths?
That's the crucial link. And yeah, the evidence here is pretty strong too, especially looking at places that mandated reflective gear.
Like in Europe, I know some countries made reflectors compulsory.
Right. Several countries did, especially for pedestrians at night outside well-lit areas. And consistently, they saw significant drops in pedestrian fatalities, often in the range of 30 to 50%.
30 to 50% reduction. That's massive.
It really is. Look at Poland after their 2009 mandate. They reported a 40% drop in accidents in unlit areas. Pedestrian deaths in those rural unlit spots fell by 37%. Even in lit areas, fatalities dropped by 33%.
So a clear impact across the board there.
Definitely. The Czech Republic brought in a mandate in 2015, saw a 33% reduction in pedestrian fatalities.
Okay.
Estonia's case is maybe even more striking. They had a rural requirement since '92, added urban areas in 2011. They reported a 75% drop in pedestrian deaths overall, urban and rural. 75%.
Wow. It's hard to argue with numbers like that. It points strongly towards mandates working.
It does seem that way. And it's not just pedestrians. There was a big Danish study on cyclists, over 6,700 of them.
What did they find?
Those who wore yellow high-vis jackets reported 47% fewer injury accidents and 55% fewer collisions involving cars. Even after adjusting for other factors, the overall reduction was about 38%.
Interesting. And you said yellow jackets, so that's fluorescence working during the day, too.
Yeah, the effect was actually strongest in winter and during daylight, which suggests the fluorescent aspect was really paying off.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
Any other studies on cyclists?
There's a Norwegian study suggesting cyclists who used high-visibility gear were less likely to be involved in crashes. And a New Zealand study found cyclists who always wore fluorescent gear had significantly fewer days off work due to crash injuries.
Okay, so consistent findings there. What about other road users?
Good question. There's research showing high Vs reduce the odds of collision for horse riders and handlers by 80%.
80%.
Yeah. And even putting retroreflective tape on big rig trailers, a U.S. study showed it cut side and rear impacts in the dark by 29% and injury crashes by 44%. It just makes big things more visible.
So the principle holds. Make things easier to see and fewer collisions happen. Seems straightforward, but the data backs it up.
And let's circle back quickly to Biomotion, because its specific benefits are really worth highlighting again.
Right, the limb reflectors.
We mentioned the increased recognition distances 3 times further for pedestrians compared to a vest, and an incredible 26 times further than someone in all black.
26 times. That's almost unbelievable.
It sounds it, but that's what the research indicated. And for cyclists, Biomotion meant recognition 3 times further away than with just a vest. It really hammers home that highlighting human movement is powerful.
And you said it works well even in complex environments.
Yeah, studies suggest it holds up well even with visual clutter, headlight glare, and even for drivers who might have some vision issues. It's robust.
And some standards are starting to reflect this.
Exactly. Australia and New Zealand updated their standards, ASNZS 4602.1, back in 2011 specifically to include recommendations for retroreflective material on moving joints based directly on this Biomotion research.
So official recognition of its superiority in certain contexts.
Yep. So the evidence seems pretty clear that this gear works, but it's not always simple. There are factors that influence how well it works.
Right, it's not just wear anything reflective and you're fine.
Right.
Context matters.
Definitely. First big one, day versus night. Fluorescent colors for daytime visibility. They pop in sunlight or overcast conditions.
Yellow, orange, red, orange are usually best.
But useless in the dark. At night, you absolutely need retroreflective material to bounce back those headlights.
And sometimes gear that combines both is useful, right? For those twilight hours or bad weather.
Exactly. Dawn, dusk, rain, fog, having both can be a good bet. Then there's color contrast in where you put the stuff.
We said yellow for daytime fluorescence. What about nighttime retroreflection?
Red and yellow tend to be effective. Some suggest blaze orange might be really conspicuous too, but the key is contrast.
Contrast against the background.
Yeah, what makes you stand out? Sometimes, believe it or not, in a really bright, visually noisy city scene, darker clothing with strategically placed bright reflective strips might actually create better contrast than a full fluorescent vest.
Interesting. And placement biomotion on the joints for night. What else?
Those little dangly reflectors, sometimes called medallion reflectors, can be quite effective because they swing and catch the light. And aiming for 360-degree coverage is smart front back sides.
Makes sense. Don't want to be invisible from the side. What about the environment itself?
Huge factor. Bad weather, rain, fog, snow obviously cuts visibility for everyone and can make reflective materials less effective if they get coated or wet. Brighter, high-quality gear becomes even more important then.
Someone mentioned that high-vis might blend into complex wet city scenes at night, too.
Yeah, that's a point about contrast. Again, lots of reflections from wet roads, signs, other lights. It can be visually complex.
And lighting. Street lights help, surely.
They help, but don't solve everything. Retroreflective gear still relies on the direct beam of headlights. Streetlights might illuminate you generally, but maybe not enough, especially mid-block or against a busy background.
Urban versus rural matters, too, right?
Definitely. Cities have visual clutter. Maybe lime green offers good contrast. Rural roads are often unlit. Speeds can be higher, so you need that long-distance detection. Maybe orange contrasts better with natural backgrounds there. That NHTSA trailer study showed bigger benefits in dark, unlit areas.
And higher speeds mean less time to react, making early detection even more vital.
Absolutely. Then there are the human factors.
Ah, yes. People actually have to wear this stuff.
Right. And sometimes they don't want to because of style or comfort or just inconvenience. Cost can be a barrier too.
And do people realize how invisible they are?
Often, no. People tend to overestimate how visible they are to drivers, especially at night. And they might underestimate the benefits of reflective gear or misunderstand it, like thinking their bright yellow fluorescent vest works great in pitch black.
Which it doesn't, as we said. What about risk compensation? Do people get reckless if they feel safer?
It's a theoretical concern, sometimes debated. Some UK studies suggested drivers might pass cyclists wearing high-vis slightly closer, but the data is complex and contested. Importantly, the overall accident and injury statistics still show reductions when visibility aids are used. And let's not forget, a leading cause of crashes is simply drive right or fail to look properly. Being seen helps combat that directly.
So even if there's a tiny bit of risk compensation, the net effect of being more visible seems overwhelmingly positive. Lack of knowledge about what type of gear is best is probably also an issue.
For sure. Which brings us to a really modern twist.
Yeah.
How does this gear interact with new car technology?
You mean the automatic emergency braking systems, AEB?
Exactly. Pedestrian AEB. These systems are designed to detect pedestrians and brake automatically to prevent or lessen a crash. Huge potential, right? Could cut pedestrian crashes by maybe 27%, estimates suggest.
But there's a catch, especially at night.
Well, yeah, their effectiveness can drop on dark roads if the system doesn't detect the pedestrian well. And here's the really surprising part. A recent IIHS study, just from early 2025, found that some types of reflective clothing can actually make pedestrians less detectable by some AEB systems.
Wait, less detectable. How does that work?
Okay, so IIHS tested 3 SUVs, a Honda CR-V, a Mazda CX-5, and a Subaru Forester. They used a dummy dressed in different outfits. Plain black, a full retro-reflective jacket, black clothes with reflective Biomotion strips on the limbs, and plain white. They ran tests at 25 mph in various nighttime lighting.
And the results?
Big differences. The Honda and Mazda systems, well, they struggled. The CR-V hit the dummy in 84% of the tests overall. The CX-5 hit it in 88%.
Wow, that's not great.
And here's the kicker. Neither the Honda nor the Mazda slowed down effectively when the dummy wore the Biomotion reflective strips at all. Didn't matter what the lighting was. The Honda also failed with the full reflected jacket, and the Mazda with the reflected jacket actually performed worse than when the dummy was in plain black under certain lighting.
That's deeply counterintuitive. The gear designed to make you more visible to humans made you less visible, or at least triggered less response from the machine.
It seems that way for those specific systems. Now, contrast that with the Subaru Forester. It performed brilliantly, avoided hitting the dummy in nearly every single trial.
So some systems handle it fine, others don't.
Exactly. The one time the Subaru did make contact with the reflective strips in low light, it still scrubbed off over 80% of its speed. Huge difference in performance between the makes.
What's the theory? Why would reflective strips cause problems?
IHS thinks the reflective strips, the biomotion pattern, might have actually confounded the sensors on the less effective systems, created what their president called a worrisome blind spot. The pattern meant to highlight human movement for our eyes, potentially confused the algorithm.
So a clash between designing for human perception and designing for current machine perception.
Precisely. It means automakers need to tweak their systems, basically. Honda and Mazda said they're looking into it. It also means safety standards probably need an update to consider both human and machine vision.
We need more research on how AEB reacts to all sorts of reflective gear, right?
Yep.
Including the stuff emergency workers wear.
Definitely. The goal has to be synergy, conspicuity aids, and vehicle sensors working together, not against each other.
Okay, so that's the passive reflective gear and the AEB issue. What about active lighting, like LEDs?
Right. So reflective gear is passive needs external light. Active lighting, like LED bike lights or wearable flashing lights, creates its own light.
Advantages of passive.
Yeah.
Cheap, simple, lightweight, effective when lit up, great for biomotion. Disadvantages.
Yeah.
Needs headlights, fluorescent fades, potential AEB issue with some patterns.
Advantages of active. Self-illuminating, works outside headlight beams, flashing lights, grab attention, maybe cuts through driver distraction better.
Disadvantages.
That's
Needs
it.
batteries, adds costs, weight, maintenance, durability, and waterproofing can be issues too.
So which is better? Or does it depend?
Well, some studies do show active lights increase detection distance more than passive reflectors alone. A flashing light is hard to ignore.
But does it help with recognition as much as biomotion?
That's less clear. One study on cyclists found that while reflective clothing with biomotion definitely improved recognition, adding a bike light didn't significantly boost that recognition aspect further. So maybe lights are great for getting noticed, but biomotion is key for being identified as human. Relying only on lights might not be enough.
A review by Kwan and Mapstone basically said lamps, flashing lights, and retroreflective gear, especially biomotion, all help with detection and recognition. They all play a role.
And some research on electroluminescent panels, those glowing strips, suggested that combining EL with retroreflective material gave drivers more response time than just retroreflectives, especially if the person wasn't directly in the headlights.
So maybe the best approach is layering, combining active and passive.
Seems likely. Bike lights plus biomotion reflectors, maybe add some wearable LEDs if you're walking. It gives you backup if one system fails or isn't optimal in a given situation. They seem complementary.
Okay, stepping back even further. What do the big organizations and governments say? What's the official advice globally?
Well, international bodies like the World Health Organization, the OECD, the EU, they all push the basic see and be seen principle. The EU has specific guidance for cyclists, lights, reflective vests or bright clothing, proper bike reflectors.
Any nuances?
The OECD noted that for motorcyclists, the effectiveness of high Vs can vary. Bright colors may be better in busy traffic during the day. Darker colors might offer better contrast on open roads, and reflective is key at night. So, context again.
What about specific countries? US, Canada, UK.
In the U.S., NHTSA and the FHWA encourage bright and reflective clothing, bike lights, reflectors. Transport Canada is similar, and they specifically mention using biomotion on limbs. They also note autumn is a high-risk time for young pedestrians.
And the UK.
ROSPA advises light colors and reflective bits on accessories. An older analysis from Transport for London suggested conspicuity helps cyclists, but wanted more research on serious injury prevention. There are claims PFL's high-vis program cut low-light accidents by 25%, but finding the primary source for that specific number is tricky. Australia and New Zealand seem ahead on biomotion, embedding it in standards. Yes, translating that research into official guidance quickly.
So common themes and guidelines are bright fluorescent for day, retroreflective for night low light, cyclists need lights and reflectors, biomotion placement is often highlighted, and always safe behavior is emphasized alongside gear.
But there's a difference in how these guidelines are applied, right? Mandates versus just encouragement.
Huge difference. We saw the impact in Poland, the Czech Republic, Estonia, where reflectors are mandatory for pedestrians in certain situations with fines for not wearing them. Many other places just encourage use. That difference in policy and enforcement almost certainly affects how many people actually use the gear and therefore the overall safety impact.
Political will and policy choices clearly matter here.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. Synthesize the evidence. Back to the big question. Does reflective gear actually save lives?
Based on everything we've looked at,
Yeah.
yes. The evidence strongly indicates it does significantly save lives and reduce injuries, particularly for pedestrians and cyclists at night or in low light.
The key evidence points being
Massively increased detection and recognition distances, documented reductions in fatalities and accidents, especially where mandates exist and in cyclist-specific studies, and the proven effectiveness of biomotion for human recognition.
But with nuances.
Absolutely. It depends on using the right material for the conditions, the quality and placement of the gear, the specific environment. Human factors like low adoption rates and people maybe not understanding visibility are real issues.
And the new challenge with some AEB systems potentially being confused by certain reflective patterns, that needs fixing.
Right. That AEB issue doesn't cancel out the benefits for human drivers, which are still the vast majority of the equation, but it's something that needs urgent attention from automakers and standard-setting bodies.
So it's an evolving landscape. We need an integrated approach thinking about passive gear, active lights, and vehicle sensors together.
The future might involve new materials, maybe smart clothing that interacts with vehicles, and definitely better standardized testing that considers both human eyes and machine sensors. The goal is making sure vulnerable road users are seen and responded to effectively by everything on the road.
So what are the practical recommendations then for individuals?
Embrace all conditions visibility. Bright fluorescence for day. Good quality retro-reflective gear for night. Low light, bad weather. Prioritize biomotion placement at night. Consider adding active lighting like bike lights or wearable LEDs. And importantly, be realistic about your own visibility and the risks. Stay informed.
And for policymakers and transport authorities.
Promote education campaigns. Seriously, look at the evidence from places with mandates and consider if that's appropriate. Keep investing in safer infrastructure, better lighting, dedicated paths, safer crossings, traffic calming, and fund research into these evolving areas like AEB interaction and new materials.
Finally, for manufacturers, both vehicles and safety gear.
For vehicle makers, fix the AEB blind spots urgently. Tweak the algorithms, train them better. Work towards robust testing standards that include pedestrians and cyclists and various reflective gear. For safety gear companies, design stuff that works. Effective fluorescence, high-quality retro-reflective materials placed for biomotion. Make it durable, give clear instructions, and maybe start thinking proactively about machine vision-friendly designs that work well for both people and sensors.
Okay, so the main takeaway really is, yes, the evidence strongly supports that reflective gear saves lives. It boosts visibility, helps recognition, and cuts accidents and deaths, despite some complexities and emerging tech challenges.
Making informed choices about your own visibility is just a critical part of staying safe out there.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Considering the proven benefits for human vision and these new complexities with machine vision, what innovations in materials, technology, or even policy do you think will best ensure vulnerable road users are safe in all conditions, seen by all eyes, human and electronic?
Something to ponder.
This deep dive was brought to you by the Be Safe, Be Seen podcast, sponsored by Reflectors. Thanks for joining us.